Hi, my name is Sean Jones, and today I'm going to be talking about combining social media storytelling with web archives. And this has a lot of uses. This is really fascinating how we do it, and also interesting how you can do it yourselves for your own collections. So we're going to give you an overview of building a small story from a large collection. We'd like to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services for funding this series of instructional videos and the SID work process and project in general. Storytelling with web archives has multiple use cases. The first is promotion of the collection. Storytelling allows a curator, someone who maintains the collection, archivists, others, to promote the collection and making others aware of it. And we want to do this because we want people to know that these collections exist and they can make use of it. We want to ensure that patrons are able to come by and find the things that they're looking for. The second thing is exploring aspects of the collection. Maybe you want to expose specific sides of a news story that your collection covers, or focus on specific people or places. And users can explore a collection further through these things that you expose, thus giving them the criteria and the concepts that they need in order to further expand their knowledge on this topic. And the third item is summarization. Web archive collections are too large for manual review. We need a summary to understand what they contain. And this is the topic of my PhD research. It's also something that is sorely needed because web archive collections consist of thousands, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of documents. And they could be very unwieldy for an archivist, let alone someone who's coming in and looking at your collection from the outside. And so today's lesson goals are to introduce social media storytelling. We're going to identify the two actions of combining social media storytelling with web archives. And we're going to provide an overview of Al-Numani's algorithm used for generating the resources for a story. And finally, we'll highlight tools from the Dark and Stormy Archives project for executing Al-Numani's algorithm and producing stories. Now, storytelling in literature consists of elements, things like a setting or characters or sequence. We have these ideas of the human experience and how storytelling brings them forward. This is not the kind of storytelling we're doing. We're also not doing the kind of storytelling where we're recording people's impressions or concepts from their lives or their recounting of an experience. What we're looking at is storytelling in social media. And storytelling in social media consists of an arrangement of resources for summarization. We have three examples here of different platforms summarizing these same resources about the Boston Marathon bombing. And so you see that these platforms give us some idea of what happened through pictures and text and other things. And social cards are summaries of web resources. So we take something like this long URL here, which, unless you're very familiar with Google Maps circa 2017, you may not know where this will take you if you put this into your browser or you click on it. This same URL represented as a social card lets you know that this will give you directions from Old Dominion University to Los Alamos National Laboratory. And it gives you a map, a picture. It also indicates the title of the page, the directions. It tells you that this is Google Maps. And so this is very important because with a glance, you get an idea of what is behind this URL. And so we have our title, text snippet, and striking image to give us that clue. And social media storytelling uses groups of social cards to provide a summary of summaries. Each social card summarizes a web resource. Each story groups the cards, summarizing the topic. And this is really powerful because it gives someone an idea of the names, the places, the pictures of what happened. As we see on the left here, with this collection, this particular story about the Boston Marathon bombing, you have pictures of suspects, politicians, police response, And it really gives us an idea of what's going on. But in addition, we also have titles, headlines, summaries, and sources, providing correct source attribution so we know exactly where these items were published, where they came from. And the other nice thing about this is that social cards contain the same information in the same place on each card. And this allows us to easily compare cards to each other. So we can look at just the images by staring on the left, or we can look at the titles and compare them to each other, or the sources. And we want to use this technique to summarize Web Archive collections because users are already familiar with this visualization paradigm. And you have another example on the right here, this Wakelet story about the a hunger crisis with the Rohingya people. And so this conveys information that one may not know for a topic that one may not know anything about, so that they could then do further research. They are now armed with terms and concepts so they could go further. And Al-Numani analyzed popular social media stories and discovered that they contained around 28 elements. And they contain mostly social cards. This means that they're mostly links to other content. And because they're mostly links, popular stories help users by reducing a topic down to a small number of items, a summary. So 28 elements are what we're aiming for here. We want to build our story such that it will be popular, such that it will be something that someone will want to consume and give them the information that they need to further understand what's in the collection, to further explore the collection, and to further continue their research. And existing storytelling services are bookmarking. We have an example here of this Storify story where someone has linked to something, but it does not exist anymore. And so the solution here would be to combine storytelling services with Web Archives. So Web Archive collections consist of mementos. These are different versions of the same page over time. And this allows us to do some neat things, like we can watch the University of Utah Office of Admissions change its web presence over time, or we can explore the evolution of a movement in this Black Lives Matter blog on Tumblr. And mementos are the documents in Web Archive collections. I want to stress that. Web Archive collections consist of seeds and crawls of those seeds, seeds being just a list of URLs for the Web Archive to download and capture. The mementos from these crawls are versions of the pages from the time of the crawl. They're observations. And the mementos are the documents in our collections. So if we're looking at the collections and we're doing something with this Black Lives Matter blog, each of these mementos has the same seed. The same URL was used during the capture, but they were all captured at different times. And thus, they have different content and consist of, they are different mementos. But each one is its own document. And thus, the documents in our Web Archive collections are the mementos themselves. And building stories from Web Archives consists of two main actions. One, we want to select a small subset, the magic number being 28. We want to select around 28 mementos from the Web Archive collection. And secondly, we want to visualize that subset via social media storytelling tool. So storytelling with Web Archives, action number one. We want to choose K items from N, where K is much, much smaller than N. Remember, Web Archive collections, in this case, have N mementos in them, N being thousands or hundreds of thousands of documents. And we want to choose K, around 28 items from those collections. So we sample our K mementos from the N mementos of the collection to create our summary story. Now, websites, as you see on the left, they'll group content, which is very helpful. But curators theme some of this content across multiple websites into collections, which we then can perform additional analysis on to reduce to a story. And selecting our K mementos manually would require exploring the Web Archive collection and deciding on our story. And I encourage you to do this. What people, places, and ideas are in the collection? And if we're going to tell a story from the collection, we have to decide, what story do we want to tell? What events are the stories centered on? Do we want to address the 5 W's? Who, what, when, where, how, and why? And then to select the K mementos, at least for an archived collection, we use the Web Archive collection search engine to find the people and places and so on that reflect the story that we want to tell. And we record the URLs of these mementos, and then we choose about 28 from the thousands of mementos that we encounter. We can do this especially if we're very, very familiar with the collection. However, sometimes we're not familiar with the collection, or sometimes we don't have the time to go through and analyze all of this manually. And thus, Al-Nomani developed her own algorithm, which can be executed using a tool named Hypercane, which is part of the Dark and Stormy Archives project. And we're going to go over Al-Nomani's algorithm, just the normal steps, not just because this is how we reduce collections currently, but because it's important for you to understand your collections and how you might go through and try to figure out what these collections are about. So even if you don't execute Al-Nomani's algorithm with Hypercane, you could go through these steps yourself when considering, when analyzing, when exploring your own collections. So the first step is to identify off-topic mementos. Collections have a theme. Seeds are selected to support that theme. Mementos are versions of seeds, and some of these versions are off-topic. And so we have a variety of different instances of off-topic. It's not just that there are 404s like you see in the upper left corner. 404s are easy to discover because the web server communicates the 404 status code when you load the page. However, we have other situations like where the account has been suspended on the lower left. That is much more difficult to detect. Or in the upper right, where the account has actually been hacked and we've captured hacked versions of these web pages over time. And we don't want those to be in our story, unless we're making a story about hacked web pages. And some of these versions, some of these mementos are off topic like this. But even more difficult to determine is when the web page has moved on from the topic. And this is going to be an important first step for making sure that we can reduce the collection to get to our 28. Now, first we remove the off-topic mementos. But why? The point is we want to identify and exclude, not remove. We're not removing things from the collection. We're just excluding them from consideration. But they don't make for good summaries if we're trying to summarize the collection. And Al-Nomani's algorithm step 2 is to remove duplicate mementos. Remember, a memento is an observation from a particular point in time, and sometimes the web page didn't change. And so what we have here is a nice visualization that Al-Nomani developed of this particular page that did not change between February 1st and February 4th, but did change on February 9th, February 11th, and February 14th. And the different colors indicate which mementos are effectively the same document. Now, Al-Nomani's algorithm step 3. Only consider pages using the language of your story. Typically, we want to tell a story with a single language. Now, you can skip this step if you're not particularly interested in trying to make a story all Japanese or all English or something like that. But typically, we have an idea that our people who are going to visit our story are going to speak one language, unless, of course, your goal is to expose the diversity of languages that exist in your collection. And Anomani's algorithm step 4 is to slice the collection so that we cover the spread across time. To ensure that we account for the spread across time, because Web Archive collections typically capture things over the course of weeks or months or years, we want to make sure that each of those time periods is well distributed, well represented in our final collection. And so for n mementos, if the number is less than 28, the number of slices is n. If n is greater than 28, then we use this particular equation to determine the number of slices. And this way, the size of the story grows slowly as needed for large collections. So we might get a little bit higher than 28 if the collection is large enough, but it's going to grow slowly. We have generated some stories through this method that may have as many as 40, but that's still something that your visitors, your patrons, that we can go ahead and review manually as humans compared to thousands of mementos. And Anomani's algorithm step 5 is to cluster each slice for novelty. We reuse the SIMHASH scores from the deduplication step, and we build these clusters from the distance between these SIMHASH scores. Now, if you don't understand what I just said, basically all I'm indicating is that we try to figure out which documents are very similar to each other, and we put them together so that we can later select the ones that are more unique, more novel from the collection. And before moving on to step 6, we have to understand that sometimes mementos experience damage. Memento damage is this problem that occurs because sometimes the crawl did not get a particular image before it disappeared. Sometimes a style sheet was not acquired by the web archive. Sometimes JavaScript just wasn't downloaded or maybe can't execute properly in the playback environment of the web archive. And this lack of resources is called damage. And note that calculating memento damage takes a long time, because it has to render the page and find out if things are broken. So we have to keep this in mind when analyzing our collections. Now, Anomani's algorithm step 6 is to select high quality mementos, and we're trying to favor pages that are news over social media because social media posts produce poorer stories, longer URLs with deeper paths because they typically contain more unique information and thus produce better cards. And finally, they have low memento damage. We want our patrons to view the mementos in our collections that look more complete and less like this. Now, as I mentioned before, we can automatically select mementos with Hypercane. Hypercane is a command line application. And Anomani's algorithm can be run against an archivic collection by running the appropriate command, or against a set of time maps. Or we could use Hypercane, not have it use Anomani's algorithm, and randomly select 5 mementos from a list of mementos. And finally, we could filter out duplicates and off-topic items from a set of time maps and then randomly select 20 mementos. There are various different things that we can do with Hypercane. We're not just limited to Anomani's algorithm. And we're going to produce additional videos on how to use this powerful tool for going through your collection and extracting meaningful documents from it. Our second step is storytelling with web archives, action 2. Visualizing our selection of K items. Now remember, our K are 28 items. Were generated automatically with the previous process, or they were generated by you. The point is that once we have our selection of K items, now we want to visualize them so that people can enjoy them, so they can see what's going on, they can understand our collection or understand the aspect we're trying to convey. Now, Storify shut down on May 16th, 2018. Originally, we visualized stories from Web Archive collections by using Storify. And because it's shut down, now we need to find an alternative. But there's a variety of criteria. I mean, we want to visualize our K mementos effectively. We want to do things like take a story of 15 mementos and visualize them as a blogger post, or maybe take the same, visualize them as a Twitter thread. Now we could use Facebook, creating a Facebook post with the title of your story as the text, create a comment, take the first URL from your story, your list of resources, and place it in the comment. Wait for the card to appear, and then repeat for each additional URL. And we were really excited about this concept because we thought all we need to do is just use Facebook for what it's good for, its ability to produce these cards. But the problems with summary stories on Facebook. Facebook doesn't always generate a card for the link. As you see on the left, there are 2 comments there, and the one on the top did not produce a card. The one on the bottom did, but there's no description. Now you can fix this by editing the comment and inserting your own text and image. But now you're creating cards for Facebook. And if a logged in Facebook user clicks on a card, they may not get to the memento, as you see on the lower right. Sometimes Facebook adds extra stuff to the end of the URL for users that are logged in so that they can track them. And web archives don't know what to do with this extra stuff, and they assume that it's part of the URL that you're trying to use, so it will produce a 404. This is not what we want for our patrons. This is not what we want for our visitors. And then on top of it, comments don't always appear in the order you inserted them. If you wanted your story to flow a particular way, say to convey the correct series of events over time, Facebook will reorder it because it's more interested in making sure that popular comments surface to the top. And existing platforms do not reliably produce social cards from mementos. We looked at more than 60 different platforms, from Twitter Moments to Listly to Flockler to Instagram, and we found a variety of different problems. Sometimes it would not generate a card at all. Other times, the platform would produce an error or a blank page or something. There are a variety of different behaviors that we encountered. And Instagram doesn't produce cards for URLs at all, focusing primarily on images. So we have to do the work to create our own cards. And some services have stories, but not long-term storytelling. Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat all have their own stories, but these platforms delete the user stories 24 hours after they're posted. This is the opposite of archiving. This is the opposite of preservation. We want our stories to be something that could be shared, possibly archived themselves. And this form of social media storytelling is the opposite of what we're looking for. And existing card services like Embedly and Embed create a confusing experience for mementos. As you see on the left, Embedly produces wonderful cards for web resources. Here it pulled in a beautiful picture of this from this CNN article about the Egyptian Revolution. It extracted meaningful text. It was able to create a good title, but it simultaneously attributes the content to CNN and archive it. And this can be confusing for readers. It can be confusing for visitors because it's not certain where this particular item came from. Did it come from Archive-It? Did it come from CNN? And so who published these resources? Now, as someone who's using this card in a particular story, I need to be concerned that my readers, my visitors, might think that it's fake news because of these inconsistencies. And as you see on the right, Embed doesn't even pull in an image, and it seems to have some character encoding issues, and still simultaneously attributes the content to CNN and Archive-It. So neither social media services nor card services were reliable for storytelling, so we created Memento Embed. Now, Memento Embed is an archive-aware surrogate service. It can locate information about the memento that's not available in other cards. Things like when the memento was captured, things like where it was captured from. And information in the Memento Embed social card is separated to avoid issues of confusion about attribution. So in this particular example, we can see on the bottom that it's attributed to CNN, but as we see on the top, it's preserved by Archivit. And so, like other card services, we can pull in things like an image, we have text, we have description, we have titles, but we can also provide the date of capture. We can provide the collection, in the case of Archivit collections, we can provide the collection that it belonged to, and we can provide links to other mementos for this resource, link to the current version of this resource if it still exists. And only an archive-aware service can do this. And it's not just limited to Archivit. Even though a lot of these examples I'm using are from Archivit, it can work with the Internet Archive, UK Web Archive, any Memento-compliant archive. And Memento Embed just produces cards and information from mementos. So we created Raintail to tell stories. Raintail uses Memento Embed to generate the raw HTML stories or publish them to services like Twitter. And it takes a text file consisting of the URLs for the story. Now, this file could be generated by Hypercane using Al-Nomani's algorithm like we discussed before, or a random set of URLs, or it could be generated by you. You can manually select Memento URLs and insert them into the story. We separated these two tools for this exact reason. And Raintail uses templates to let you customize the look and destination media of your story. We can have Memento Embed cards on Blogger, or we could extract components from the cards themselves. This is something Raintail does, and produce a Twitter thread. Or we could produce output that could be pasted into MediaWiki pages. Or you could create your own template, as you see on the far right, in this fictionalized My Archive, where we have a variety of images, some text, attribution to the appropriate content, to appropriate publisher, and other things. But the point is that someone created this themselves for their archive, their branding, their formatting. So Raintail can easily be incorporated into other archival workflows. So in summary, we introduced social media storytelling. And storytelling with web archives consists of two actions. One, selecting K mementos from the collection of N mementos where K is far less than N. And our value for K should be around 28. Second, we want to visualize our selection of K mementos via a social media story. Now, per action one, we covered the challenges of manually selecting mementos for stories and the steps of Al-Nomani's algorithm for automatically selecting mementos. And per action two, we highlighted the need for archive-aware cards via Memento Embed and how other services did not do such a great job with producing cards for mementos. So that's why we had to make Memento Embed. And we also highlighted the Raintail storytelling tool for web archives, which just contacts Memento Embed, pulls in the appropriate information, and formats it the way you tell it to. It can produce Memento Embed cards, or it can produce something that's customized to your institution. And thus, we covered how to combine social media storytelling with web archives. And for more information on the Dark and Stormy Archives project, we have a variety of links here. One will lead you to the project main page. Then we have a variety of links for Raintail. We have a main website and then extensive documentation where we encourage you to report issues to this particular URL. And then there's Memento Embed, which has its own documentation and you can report issues as well. And finally, the newest tool in the Dark and Stormy Archives toolkit is Hypercane. And it has its own website documentation and you can report issues there. And we encourage you to explore these tools and help us develop this tool set so that we can produce better and better stories together. Thank you. My name's Sean Jones, and I have been discussing combining social media storytelling with web archives. We have additional videos on these topics, which will cover things like how to use Raintail, how to use Memento Embed, and of course Hypercane to do some of the things that we've only lightly touched on here. And we're hoping that you could adopt them and create your own stories. And we really want to see what you come up with. Thank you. Have a good day.